All right, last time we left in Hebrews chapter 5 with a change in the priesthood. To early Christians who were mostly Jewish, most of them were Jewish, not sure about the timing of this letter, which has actually been called a sermon, just because teaching is giving out information and hoping that people will use it and improve their lives that way. Preaching is quite different. Preaching is not just giving out the information, but strongly urging people to put it into practice. Two different types of communication. It's a little more difficult for preaching because you have to follow a logical pattern. In our day and time, preach means that one guy talks and everybody listens quietly. But when Paul was in Troas, he did not preach until midnight. Even I know your translation says he did. You know, the translations don't go with the original. A lot of times because publishers can't sell the Bible. No, actually, the actual word there is that Paul dialogued until midnight when Eutychus fell out the window. He wasn't even done at midnight. But a dialogue is a two-way communication. Dia is two. Logia is a discussion about a topic. So they had Bible class, is what they had. And they work all day because it was a Roman colony. They didn't get a weekend. You work 7 days a week. And you work from sunup to sundown. They let you go home to sleep. So it would have been at night. They were in an upper room. It was in the spring or summertime because they don't sail in the winter. Paul had come in with his mission team. So poor guy who had worked all day sitting in the window to try to get some fresh air fell asleep. Tired. He fell out. Some commentators believe he was named afterwards because the name Eutychus means fortunate one. Paul raised him from the dead after his fall out of the window. So a lot of that teaching comes about. A discussion is necessary, and preaching has its place, but it doesn't really cover the main aspect of the encouragement, or as teaching would. And this letter is more of a sermon, where Paul's letters are more of a dialogue, a discussion. In fact, he has a discussion with himself in the book of Romans. They call that a diatribe. Those in the education field know what a diatribe is. You ask a question, you know the answer. You're not asking for a response. You're doing it so people will follow your logical pathway. And he does a lot of diatribe in Romans. This letter is written by someone who is strongly urging people to hear, to listen, to take it to heart, and then the strong urgings come in. I think I mentioned last time that a lot of the guys in my class in college were calling this the garden letter, the garden passages, because of the hortatory subjunctives that are there. You know what a hortatory subjunctive is? Use it all the time. Just don't know what it is. It's hortatory comes from exhortation or encouragement. Subjunctive means that your response is subjective to your willingness or desire or ability to accomplish it. Generals in war, they bark out commands, don't they? And you do it or you die. And other people die along with you if you don't do it. The subjunctive is, let's go to lunch. They're called the garden passages. These guys were teasing me, calling it the garden passages, because it all starts with lettuce. That's a dad joke for you, I guess. But it's, let us encourage one another as long as it's called today. When I say let's go to lunch, that's subjective, isn't it? Because you may have an appointment today and you can't make it. Or you may not care for me and don't want my company and don't want to see me trying to eat food. Let's go to the park with the kids. That always gets a yes, but not always from Grandma and Grandpa, because That's hard work. These guys wear me out. So it's subjective. So let's encourage one another daily as long as it is called today, because we have to do that. Let us not forsake assembling together. We preach and teach that as a command. But the "let us" has been left off in our translations. It's in the original. It's not, if you have to command people to come together, they're really not coming together for the right reason, are they? And I think Cam brought it up a few weeks ago when he quoted from Jeremiah. This new thing I'm going to do, I'm going to write my laws in their minds. I'm going to write them on their hearts. Which means you're doing it because you know you need it. Not because you have to. And I hate the commentators that talk about our church attendance as a duty. It's a necessity. And we need to reach the point where we're gathering together because we know we can't live without it. One day a week is not enough. Who's got you the other 7? 7 to 1. Not good chances, not good odds.
It makes you wonder if the guy sitting in the window came back the next time.
I'm sure. Well, they encouraged him. And one of the things the commentators have found out in studying the linguistics of the scriptures, if a person is named, it's usually because the readers who are reading the letter that is sent to them know the person. The guy whose ear was cut off in the garden by Peter, named Malchus. And a lot of the depictions, I like these video depictions you see about that time period with Jesus in the garden. He's one of the rabble who have come to arrest Jesus. He's convinced Jesus is a fraud. Jesus restores his ear, and they always have him, when the rabble's taking Jesus away, they have him just back up and leaving. After that, he was convinced. He knew what happened. So they probably knew Malchus. They probably knew Joseph of Arimathea. They probably knew Nicodemus as part of their group, usually because they name them. And so Eutychus, it's very possible after that, he didn't want to be anywhere else. Everyone knew him. Yeah. So anyway, this is these encouragements by the preacher of the letter of Hebrews is strongly encouraging people to make it their desire to be together. When I witnessed this week in birthday week, my children and my grandchildren came to visit me. Now, do I need for them to dress up nice and neat and come and go through a checklist of certain acts to make me happy? What kind of a father makes his children make him happy? What kind of children want to visit a father who can't be pleased? Can't enjoy your time together? Okay, remember, God is called the Father, Abba, Father, which is what my grandkids call me, Papa. They want to be with me, and that feels good. That's the way it should be. And that's how we have to approach Christianity. Although many times it gets to the point, because Satan is very good at distracting us, isn't he? He's very good at distorting the scriptures, isn't he? And then it becomes a duty. We have to do it. We feel guilty if we don't. And then it becomes something we do. Church now has become, in the English language, an activity. We actually go to church. Instead of the church being me, and the church being you. And we come together Acts chapter 2 says they met with other Christians every day. Because a day without the encouragement is another day Satan attacks you. And we need it. So the letter here is trying to encourage people who were Jewish background. That's all they ever knew. For generations, that's all they knew. And now this Christianity thing has come on, and to them it was, Paul said our message is a scandal. Scandal was the trap that they used to trap animals in. They would have the box, and they would have the piece that held the box up, and they would put the bait underneath. When the animal would come in, they would pull the scandalon out, is what the Greeks called that peg that held the box up, so that the trap would set. He said, our message is a scandal. People don't get it. And when he said, to Jews, our message is a stumbling block. And that stumbling block was purposefully something that you would pull in front of someone to trip them up and make them fall. Make them look silly, to injure them, maybe even kill them. Because you don't like them, you don't like their philosophy. And so you would purposefully try to trip them up. Did they do that to Jesus? All the time. They tried to trick him and trap him in his words, so that the other people then wouldn't listen to him. Can't trust somebody who contradicts his own. So they brought a woman before him that was caught in the very act of adultery. Now the law says to kill her. What do you say? Okay. How many people did that take to commit adultery? Just one? Where's the other person? And what did the law say about how you came to the conclusion?
And have 2 or 3 witnesses.
Where are they?
In the background.
And both people involved were to be stoned. Now, see, if Jesus said, go ahead and kill her, that's what the law says. Well, then his teachings of love and caring and concern and forgiveness, they don't fit, do they? But if he says not to kill, now he's going against the law. So they're doing everything they can, but what his main reasoning was, and notice he didn't really answer them, did he? He's writing on the ground. They have to keep bugging him to get an answer. See, we don't have to answer every question people ask us, because every question is not meant to get an answer. It's meant to trap, to distract, to make you look stupid, to make them look superior. How many times do you watch a political speech and then you're convinced in what they say? What about the crowd? This last one, publicly taunting the speaker, had to be escorted out. Yeah, okay, they're not listening for answers. And they don't do that today. Satan doesn't do that today. So it gets to be a scandal. It's a stumbling block to Jews. And to Gentiles, he uses the ultimate word for foolish. You're an idiot. Your God became one of us, lived the perfect life, and got lynched by his own people, and now you want to listen to what he says after he's dead? An empty tomb, right? Sure. The guards, the eyewitnesses say the disciples stole the body while we were sleeping. That was a stupid answer right there.
I think so too.
For a couple reasons. Sleeping on guard duty for a Roman officer? And if you're asleep, how do you know who did it? But that was the story. It was being broadcast everywhere. Your God got lynched. There are archaeological findings, cave drawings and stuff like that, where they have a cross and they have a man with a donkey head hanging on it. And underneath the inscription says, they have a guy on his knees before it, whatever his name was, worships his God. It was a laughingstock, a cartoon to the Gentiles. But to the people from Judaism, Christianity was an anomaly they could not figure out. Because God had put a law in place forever, he said. That's how it's translated into English. Forever. What does forever mean? No end, and it'll never change. That's not what the Hebrew word means. It was put in place until a better came along. To them, the law was the ultimate. Now to find out, when Messiah came and he didn't set up an earthly kingdom, he didn't drive off the occupation, he didn't establish a nation that all others wanted to be a part of, like they had always been taught and were still being taught at the time. How do you keep people from getting discouraged with all that's going on? I've known quite a few people that came to Christ, were converted to Christ, and then afterwards left it because one guy very honestly stated, I never had so many problems until I became a Christian. So for one thing, you become a target. For another thing, you're mindful of your actions now, whereas before you weren't. And it's hard to keep at it. Usually within a couple generations, any new movement wanes with the next generations and either dies out or stagnates. Even our democracy has become a laughingstock to the world because of future generations abusing it, getting away from its original purpose. And that has happened. That happened to Judaism, to where Jesus said, now you bind heavy burdens on people's backs and you won't do a thing to help them with it. You go out and get a convert, bring him in, and you make him twice as much a son of hell as you are. Because they convert them to their system, to their doctrines, and they did not bring them back to God. Can the church be guilty of that today? Can we convert people to church and not to Christ? The church in Ephesus in the book of Revelation was denounced for forsaking their first love. The forsake is an active verb. It is something you purposefully plan and do, many times without realizing it. For someone who fails to prepare, then they prepare to fail. Have you heard that before? Yeah. And what we do is we bind people to the rules we've come up with. And the church in Ephesus, Jesus says, you have forsaken your first love. They were doing a lot of good work. They were active in the community. But their heart was not in it. Their mind was not on Christ. The disciples could not cast a demon out of a young boy because Jesus said this type only comes out with prayer. Only when you have the connection to God. And we could run into that problem. So, in chapter 5, actually the first few chapters in Hebrews, trying to establish the superiority of Jesus over anything they knew in the law of Moses. Moses was a servant in God's house. Jesus was the son Who's greater? The son is greater than the servant. He's the inheritor. Yeah. Now he claims he's the high priest. Now, for a Jew who grew up after generations of study, how would that ring? True or false? Jesus, high priest.
Not good.
What's wrong with it?
It's not Levi.
Yeah, but he's a good guy. Now, the rules according to the law, they thought the law was permanent. They thought the law was their authority. And the authority is always God. You know, we think our traditions can be authority, our interpretations. But remember, who are they supposed to be talking about? Christ. He even told the Pharisees that. You search the scriptures because you think in them you find what's important for life. But they're the scriptures that talk about me. Yet you refuse to come to me. And that's still the same today. The law of Moses was more than just the Ten Commandments. It was more than just the sacrifices. It was all the symbolism that showed how Jesus was to take away sin. And taking away sin was not easy. And it was not permanent because after they're taken away, what happens soon afterwards? Go right back into it again. So we need something on a more permanent basis here. And that is why Jesus had to come. Now, why would God put something in place that wasn't the best one? Did they have anything to compare it to? Okay, now you have the law of Moses, who had a servant as the leader. And what land inheritance did Moses get in Canaan when they finally got there?
None.
What? Why didn't he get any land?
They disobeyed.
He didn't even make it into the land of Canaan. He was able to see it from a mountaintop because of his sin. Do you want a leader who didn't succeed? Or do you want one who was perfect in every way, never failed, never has, and never will? Which one is better? See, now you have something to compare it to. How about a law? How many of the 10 Commandments has any person in humanity ever perfectly fulfilled? A rich young ruler came to Jesus and said, "What must I do?" He had a checklist, didn't he? We love our checklists. Make sure we're measuring up. Well, follow the commandments. He said, I followed those since I was a boy. Really? Well, then you can die for the sins of everybody else, and I don't have to. Now, Jesus didn't even talk about any of the 10, did he? He talked about the one most important command, whose, as he says, the second is like it, which means it comes out of it. And they had nothing to do with the first 10. Thank you. I appreciate that, Lord. We have 10 I can't do, and you give me 2 more. And that's the one the church in Ephesus failed at, was to put God first, and other people then come into your fellowship as the result. They failed. You've forsaken your first love. So, with Jesus being high priest, and he's a high priest not after the order of Levi, because the Levites were broken. And so are we. They had to offer sacrifice for themselves, then they could offer it for the people. The high priest Aaron, did he get land inheritance? See, even he didn't make it. because of his sin. Yeah. Out of the millions that left, only 2 over the age of 20, and I guess now they're 60. Only 2 made it. They were in their 80s. Yeah, and they had to wait 40 years because of the sin of other people. They could have gotten discouraged, and they did. They failed. Well, if Jesus is a great high priest, and he's after the order of Melchizedek. Last week we talked about Melchizedek, a man with a funny name. Abraham had just won a great victory. Melchizedek shows up to honor him, brought him some food. So Melchizedek is ahead of Abraham because he honored him. Abraham paid him a tithe. So Abraham knew this guy was greater than he was, even though God gave him the ultimate promise. And he believed it, and that was reckoned to him as righteousness. He paid the tithe. Who is this guy? His name gives you a hint. Melech, king. Tzaddik, righteousness. Who's the king of righteousness? He's also claimed to be the king of Shalom. Yerushalom is how today they pronounce it Jerusalem in English. Shalom means peace. Who is depicted by the prophets as the king of peace? How can Christ be around at the time of Abraham? He wasn't born of Mary yet.
He's always been.
If you were to look at John chapter 8, let's look there real quick. John chapter 8, Jesus is having a row with the people. Not just the religious leaders. The people themselves just can't get a handle on what he's doing. They can't figure out who he is. Well, he's a prophet. Good. Jesus thought, yeah, that was good company. Jeremiah, Elijah. Yeah, but who do you say that I am? And it was Peter's confession of his true identity that he used as the foundation for his church. Not on a system of rules and regulations, but on a relationship. Because Peter figured that out. But they were upset with Jesus because he claimed to be sent from God. You're just a human. And back home in Nazareth, an illegitimate child. Because they knew mom and dad couldn't wait for the wedding. She was pregnant before they got married. He grew up in a small town. How many secrets do you have in a small town? Okay, well, he said wonderful things. He did some amazing things. But Messiah can't happen. He's illegitimate. And so he's telling himself, look down verse 54 of John 8. If I glorify myself, my glory means nothing. I agree with you. I'm not saying this about myself. My Father, whom you claim to be your God, is the one who glorifies me. How's that going to go off with these Pharisees and their rules?
Not real well.
Oh! You can see them looking around on the ground for rocks to throw, can't you? That's blasphemy. My Father is the God I serve. That's penalty of death. Yeah. Though you do not know him, and that word for know is the relationship. Though you do not have a relationship with him. I do have a relationship with him. I do know him. If I did not, I would be a liar like you. How would you take that response? That's not very nice. But I do know him, have a relationship with him, and I keep his word. Well, he's just blasphemed, so that can't be true. See how Satan has got them so trapped in their law that they can't even listen to reason? Your father Abraham rejoiced at the thought of seeing my day, and he saw it. and was glad. When did Abraham see Jesus? I just gave him the name. I just gave you the name. You're not yet 50 years old, the Jews said to him. You've seen Abraham. I tell you the truth, Jesus answered. Before Abraham was born, Yahweh. That was it. They are looking for rocks. But in their distraction to get the group together and get him up against the firing squad line, he slipped away. Now, why would they throw rocks at a guy who claimed to be around before Abraham was born? That's blasphemy. Plus the prophecy from Psalm 110. You're a high priest forever. Now that word does mean legitimately no end. No beginning and no end. Forever without end. After the order of the King of Righteousness and the King of Peace.
And they were human, and they didn't understand what Christ was telling them.
Right. And so now, here's the kavit. If you can look up that word. It's a big word, I know. But here's what goes on. Back to Hebrews chapter 5. Jesus acted like a priest for us. Now, a priest had to be human, because only a human sins. So only a human can pay the price for sin. Only a human can stand in the place of a human, not bulls and goats. But all of these human priests from Levi were sinful. And they all died because of sin. So a new regime had to take over ever so often, just like the King of England now. Just like our presidencies, they change. Well, during the days of Jesus' life on earth, this is verse 7 of chapter 5, he offered up prayers and petitions with loud cries and tears to the one who could save him from death, and was heard because of his reverent submission. Now, his offerings were appeals to God on our behalf. Forgive them, they don't know what they're doing. Today you'll be with me in paradise. Yeah, that's how he offered. And then he offered himself. Although he was a son, he learned obedience from what was suffered. Now that suffering doesn't mean pain and torture. That just means learning, the learning process. And we suffer through that, don't we? He had to learn how to be a human so that he could stand in the place of a human. So God became one of us and went through life the way we do so he could pay the price. He learned it through his exertion of energy. He didn't cheat with his miraculous powers. Once made perfect, once he came to the understanding of who he was, and the others did too, because when Peter acknowledged him as the Christ, the Son of the living God, now Jesus is ready to head to the cross. That's what he came for. But not until they came to that faith. And that's why I tend to look at that myself, and this just, I know it's funny, it's silly, but when Peter called him the Christ, the Son of the living God, just went, yes! And now he's talking about his crucifixion, and Peter tried to talk him out of it, and so Jesus called him Satan for trying to talk him out of it. Talk about frustration. Yeah. But once he was made perfect, once he came to the perfect time, once the world was ready, he became the source of eternal salvation for all who obey him. That word for obey is to follow. Not just to do it once or twice, not just to follow the rules, but to act like me. And was designated to be by God, to be a high priest in the order of Melchizedek, of himself. There's no change taking place there, is there? For the people, it's all brand new. What they had thought was permanent was the stopgap measure, the temporary solution to have something to compare it to. Now we have a high priest who is God himself. You want Aaron or do you want God? You have a high priest who will never die. That system will never change. You want one that constantly changed and constantly failed because of human weakness? Or do you want one that is permanently for God? What do you want? And that choice still stands today. Unfortunately, and this is where we're going to have to end today and get into next time, this is where the perseverance comes in. This is where Satan attacks. We have much to say about this, but it's hard to explain because you're slow to learn. You're not picking up. They got to a certain point where they learned enough and they stagnated. That's when Satan eats you alive. In fact, though, by this time you ought to be teachers. Notice, not preachers. Teachers, divulging the information and practicing it as you go. You need someone to teach you the elementary truths of God's Word all over again. You need milk, not solid food. Anyone who lives on milk, still being an infant, is not acquainted with the teaching about righteousness. You're just at the opening threshold of the door of the church, and that's as far as you've gone. These people have been at it so long, they should have been on the inside calling people in, but they were still at the door, not going in themselves. But solid food is for the mature, who by constant use have trained themselves to distinguish good from evil. What was the tree in the garden that Adam and Eve ate from? The tree of the knowledge of
Good and evil.
And here these people still are in the garden wondering whether or not they should eat that fruit. And yet they've been at it for so long. They're still stuck on the old system. They're still stuck on the good old days. They're still stuck on what we used to do. And they're so frustrated that today they just don't do it like we used to. And have you ever heard people say that?
Probably said it.
So we still got the same problem today. I think we need to go back and find out who our true priest is. Chapter 6, where we're going to get into next, is the step-by-step process of how to get on toward the content and the meat of the gospel and having Jesus as not just your Lord and Savior, but as the high priest of your life, which is a daily activity, which is your daily armor of God, keeping Satan from attacking you. Turn your back, and there's no armor back there. What's Satan going to do? When I used to deliver for FedEx, it was the small dogs who used to attack, but they'd wait till I turned around and left the porch. That's Satan. We are not meant to turn away. Stand. James says Satan flees from you. But man, you have got to know who's got your back before you're willing to do that. So it's very important to understand who your high priest is. It's not another human. It's not a system of rules and regulations. It's not a duty. It's who your relationship is tied to and anchored in. That's what's going to keep you strong. We'll carry on from there then next week.